Once upon a time, in a beautiful Russian city called Moscow, there was a very evil man. How evil, my readers will ask? Very evil. Just think that Vlad, this was his name, once went to a little girl's birthday party and devoured all of her cake by himself before she could even blow out the candles. When the little girl asked him for an explanation, Vlad just said, "I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't seen any cake." His mouth and chin were still covered in whipped cream. Then, as he walked away, he took a long needle out of his pocket and pierced all of the balloons that were decorating the party, making a big noise all the while. If someone had asked the little girl and her guests if they would have wanted Vlad to become president of their country, the children would have said, "No way, he ate the whole cake and popped all the balloons." Unfortunately, children couldn't choose presidents. And so Vlad became president of Russia, a very big country. Unfortunately, when a very evil man becomes president of a very big country, things get bad. Very bad indeed. Before he became president, when Vlad read a newspaper article he didn't like, he would rip the newspaper into a million pieces. Just think that once he was so angry that he even ate 3 pages for breakfast. And he was so full that eventually he left a delicious slice of warm bread with butter and blueberry jam. However, now that he was president, Vlad no longer ate the news articles he didn't like. He would just call the police straight away and send the journalists who had written them to jail. Little by little, more and more journalists were sent to prison. Vlad was the only one left with his mouth open, and he wanted everyone else to keep their mouth tightly shut. Then silence fell over Russia. The newspapers, the televisions, the radios were voided of the words of Russian citizens. The only voice that resounded across the country was the voice of Vlad. When there were no more words, no newspapers or birthday cakes left to eat, Vlad started to think, "What am I gonna do now?" His eyes fell on a geographical map that he was keeping on top of his office desk. Then he pointed his finger to a smaller country bordering Russia. He called all the military generals and said, "I want to burst Ukraine like a balloon." If the generals had been children, they would have told him, "President, a country is not like a balloon since people don't live inside of balloons, but they do live inside of countries." But the generals were not children. So they told him, "Yes, President," then began to gather soldiers and tanks along the border with Ukraine. Now, Vlad had begun writing furiously in all the newspapers, speaking into microphones of every radio, saying to everyone, "Ukraine does not exist." Just like he did when he first ate the cake and then said there was no cake. How is that possible, is what the reporters would have asked him if they hadn't been in prison. The cakes that don't exist don't leave a whipped cream moustache on your lips. For the same reason, you don't need tanks and guns to go to a country that doesn't exist. But no one could ask anything, because whoever asked any questions was thrown inside a prison cell. When Vlad gave the tanks the order to cross the border, war broke out. And what is war, my readers will ask? War is what happens when we want to force someone to do something they don't want to do. And in order to make them do what we want, we are willing to kill them and destroy schools, hospitals, factories, and supermarkets. But how? You'll say, how can you knock down a school just because you were throwing a tantrum. Even the most spoiled child would never take down a school or even a supermarket, and definitely not an ice cream shop. In fact, wars do not arise from the tantrums of children, but from those of adults. The day Vlad ordered his soldiers to go to Ukraine, he told them a big lie. You need to know, Vlad told his soldiers, that Ukrainian people need us because Ukraine is ruled by Nazis, and Nazis are very bad, so everyone will be really happy to see you coming. They will give you flowers, steaming cups of tea, and freshly baked donuts. So the soldiers left, feeling happy and content. In fact, every human being, even those who wear a uniform and harness a rifle as their job, want to be welcomed with flowers, cups of tea, and donuts. But as soon as they set foot in Ukraine, the soldiers understood that they wouldn't get any donuts. Ukrainian people didn't want them to beat air at all. On the morning of February the 24th, Anastasia's mother told her to pack the sleeping bag that she had sewn for the campsite. Anastasia replied, "But it's too cold to go camping." But the sleeping bag was not going to be used for camping. Anastasia's family was going to hide in the woods because the Russian soldiers had started to make the streets and the houses burst like balloons. Then Anastasia and her family excavated a hole in the ground, and they would all sleep together inside of it. After her little brother had fallen asleep, she asked her mother, "What's going on, Mom?" "We can't go back home because bombs could fall on our heads," she said. "Are they coming from space?" Anastasia asked while looking at the starry sky shining bright above them. "No," her mother answered. "They are thrown by people." "What kind of people?" asked an increasingly astonished Anastasia. "People like us," replied her father. "However, those people have been told many lies." Her mother and her father explained to Anastasia that a very bad president named Vlad wanted to take Ukraine and that he had told his soldiers many lies to convince them to launch the bombs on their country. Then Anastasia told them, "But you speak Russian too. It's a beautiful language. And when we visit my grandparents, we eat Russian food and it's delicious. Sometimes Grandma reads me Russian books and those tales are beautiful too. It doesn't matter whether my bed and my toys are in Russia or in Ukraine. I just want to go home." Anastasia's mother gently caressed her head and told her, "You're right. It doesn't matter if your bed or your toys are in Ukraine or in Russia. What matters the most is that they are all in a free country." "How do you know if a country is free?" asked Anastasia's little brother, who had just woken up because he heard them talking. Looking at her father under the moonlight, Anastasia asked, "A free country is a country where citizens are not afraid, right?" "That's right. That's why we are fighting. We want to be people who live without fear," he answered.